we're going to talk about some of the practice problems related to equilibrium, and based on the lecture that we did yesterday or the day before or whenever you watched it about the different ways that we could be in an expansionary gap or a recessionary gap. So in this practice problem set, you're going to get a bunch of prompts, and it's going to say aggregate demand going increase or decrease, and then what happens to output or GDPR, and what happens to price levels as a result. So we're not going to graph each and every one of these, but these are the types of things that might be likely on an exam. So we're going to try practicing them. Now, if you did this in class, the idea was that each table takes maybe a group of 5 of them, right? So you had little groups of 5, and that way with 5 tables, right, you had 5 each. So that was kind of nice. But if you're doing it with me here just by yourself, then you just get all of the practice all at once. So let's talk through these. Significant boom in the stock market, that's going to be aggregate demand because it's going to increase consumption spending, and that would increase GDP and increase price levels. Businesses expect higher inflation soon. So if they expect higher inflation, that's inflationary expectations, that's aggregate supply, and it's going to decrease aggregate supply because they are going to have to pay more to their workers and to their suppliers and things like that. And so that's going to decrease GDP, but it will increase price levels because it's a leftward shift of SRAS. Americans express a preference for new international cars. That's going to decrease aggregate demand because there's less net exports. So GDP goes down and price levels go down. Expands higher education to improve human capital. That's going to improve worker productivity. So AS goes up, supply goes up, so therefore output goes up, but price levels will go down because an SRAS shifting to the right would reduce price levels. Larger inventories at the end of the year, that's investment spending, so that's capital I. Aggregate demand goes up, and GDP goes up, and price levels would rise. Now, likely probably that the price levels aren't going to rise in response to that because the investment is not really happening in terms of more sales. But for the purposes of our model, we'll say that it increases because of the aggregate demand increase. Increased income of a global trade partner. Now, if that's true, then our net exports are going to increase. So aggregate demand goes up, and GDP goes up, and price levels would rise. And again, price levels might not be as affected by that sort of thing, but it might have a little bit of an effect. Businesses invest in machinery that increases productivity. So that's AS going up. Now, if you said investment spending, right, I going up, that's okay too, but you would have a little bit of a different answer here for the price level. Now, if Congress cuts personal income taxes, that's going to directly affect consumption spending, and aggregate demand would rise, GDP would go up, and price levels would rise. So that's one of the effects of that kind of a policy. Congress votes to expand immigration. This one's going to be a resource prices, or it's going to be productivity if you're talking about highly skilled workers. And so we'd say aggregate supply would increase, and then GDP would rise, and price levels would fall. The central bank increases the money supply and decreases real interest rates. This is going to affect consumption and investment, and it's going to increase those because lower real interest rates mean consumption and investment is higher. So then AD is up, GDP is up, and price levels are up. Consumers expect a strong job market soon. Consumption spending, aggregate demand goes up, GDP up, price level up. Saudi Arabia reduces oil production. This one is going to be resource prices. So aggregate supply goes down, GDP goes down, and price levels go up. This would cause what we call stagflation if it were really nasty. Job training programs increase in popularity. So this, maybe we think about productivity in that sense, that productivity. And if your workers are more productive, then aggregate supply goes up. And so GDP would go up and price levels go down. Government decreases pension payments, so that's going to affect consumption spending. Notice it's not government spending, but consumption. And if they decrease them, then aggregate demand will go down, GDP would go down, and price levels would go down. Businesses reduce their purchases of new manufacturing equipment. So this is investment spending. Maybe it could affect aggregate supply in the long run, but we definitely know that they're not purchasing, right? That's key here. So aggregate demand is going to fall, GDP falls, and price levels fall. Businesses create worker training programs. This one's the same idea as the one, two or three above, productivity, and aggregate supply would increase, GDP would go up, and price levels would go down. Lower inflation means lenders decrease nominal interest rates. This one, a tricky one, right? Price levels. And if you remember, price levels don't shift the curve. So we'd say no change to the curves, And if nominal interest rates, though, are changing, we would see a change in quantity of aggregate demand, and that would increase. But it wouldn't, again, no shift, right? So that's important. It wouldn't shift the curve. Electricity prices increase due to a carbon tax. Here you could say resource prices or maybe actions by the government that affect producers, but at the end of the day, electricity is a big input cost. And if it goes up in costs, then aggregate supply is going to go down. So GDP goes down and price levels might rise. Congress cuts defense spending. That's government spending. That's aggregate demand going down, down for price levels. Investment spending. This one's pretty clear. AD goes down, and GDP goes down, and price levels go down. The US dollar increases in price compared to the euro. For this one, this is actually going back to from a few ones ago, and I still made this mistake again. Decreases in price compared to the euro. So US XN go up is actually what that one's supposed to say. So I'm sorry if you ended up with this one in your group and it threw you off. If you just read increases in price, though, it actually would cause U.S. net exports to go down. So if it's increases, then the net exports go down, and we'll just say aggregate demand goes down, then GDP and price levels go down. Labor productivity rises. That one's one of the shifters of aggregate supply and should increase. So we'd say increase and price levels go down. Higher domestic price levels. Aha! Here we go. Price levels don't shift the curve, so no change, right? So we go through. Fracking drives down energy costs. For this one, this would be aggregate supply and increasing it because of that resource price. If we increase that, then we have an increase in GDP and a lower price level. Consumers fear a recession is coming. This is the idea of consumption spending, and it would fall. If they fear a recession, they're not going to spend today, and so GDP goes down and price levels go up. I keep making that mistake. Price levels would go down as well. Rising price levels decrease. Here we go, another price levels one. That's not going to shift the curve, right? No change, because no shifts happen because of price levels. Remember that. Union membership decreases. Now, this is a resource cost. A lot of students are going to say consumption spending, but here we're going to focus on how wages are an input. Wages are a resource. And so we'd say aggregate supply would increase, and GDP would go up, and price levels would go down because of this. Homebuyers express preferences for newly constructed houses. So this would be aggregate demand would increase, and we'd have an increase in GDP and output. Increase in Social Security payments would cause a change in C. I didn't mention this, but newly constructed houses would be I. That's part of CIGXN. Increase in Social Security payments would affect C, not G, because this is a transfer, right? Transfers affect consumption spending. And so we would say aggregate demand would go up, price levels and GDP would both rise. And then last but not least, government cuts environmental regulations. This is actions by the government that affect producers. And so we'd say aggregate supply increase, GDP goes up, price levels go down. So hopefully, and I'll give you a second here to kind of process, this was just a mad rush through all 30 of these. Hopefully you were able to check your answers as you went through these. And if you have any questions, I'll be available in class, or you could make a comment on the YouTube, or you can email me as well about specific ones. I'll see you next time.